Hello animation, this is Mr. G, and we are doing part 8 of our 10-part installment of the animation process and demonstrating how to do that in Maya. What we're going to do today is we're going to go into the graph editor. And so while tangents and splines are rather synonymous, I just like to call this part splines and what we did before tangents. So just so you know, we're just kind of shifting the name even though the name's the same thing. So what our goal is today is to go through our animation joint by joint, handle by handle, and fix everything with the graph editor. My previous attempts to make this demo has wound up being a half hour. I'm going to try and go faster than that. However, this will probably be broken up into 3 parts. So just know that it might be a little choppy. So the graph editor develops a more natural movement, which creates a more realistic movement. And the more natural and realistic we are, the more believable our characters become. And that's what we're striving for with these animations. So what you should do first is you should just go File and hit Save Scene As. And you're going to make sure you go to the right place. And you're going to make sure you save it as your character and call it Spline Graph Start, or something like that, right? And now, before we get going and before we hop into the graph editor, I just want to remind you as to what things should look like in the graph editor. So just to hop into Photoshop real quick, just to kind of show you a few things here, right? So remember, if you see a graph like that, a very flat graph, my mouse hit something as I was drawing, but if you see a graph like that, a very flat graph, right? That means that there is zero movement happening. No movement is happening here. It is a flat line, means nothing is changing in that one dimension, right? So you might have no movement in the Z direction, but you might have a lot of movement in the X or the Y direction. So keep that in mind. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that a steep line means something is happening very quickly, or the speed of the animation in that one dimension is very fast. Now, it does not have to be a positive slope. It could also be a steep negative slope, right? So the graph could go this way or the graph could go that way. Steep means fast, either direction. Don't associate moving the graph up with upward movement. The only time that works is if you're in Translate Y. Speaking of Translate Y, just to give you another color. Now, the other type of graph, right? You have steep, you have flat, and then you also have a shallower slope, right? And again, it's positive or negative. It doesn't matter which direction it's going, up or down. If it's shallow, it's slow. So I just want you to keep those things in mind. Okay. The other things I wanted to go over were a little more complex with the graph editor. So we've just gone over flat, steep, and shallow. Keep these in mind as we start animating in the graph editor. The other stuff I reminded you about is spikes and sine curves. So you all remember the ball bounce, and start channeling the ball bounce and start thinking about the ball bounce. That was designed to help you with the graph editor and future assignments like this one. So remember the ball bounce, the ball starts up here and accelerates, and that's what that type of curve means, and then bounces and creates a little spike there and then decelerates due to gravity. Now this spike here, right, that's acceleration. This slope here, this curve, that symbolizes acceleration. And then this spike here represents a bounce. So if your character is having some sort of bouncy impact, right, his head bounces off a wall, or someone, you know, not a lot of you are going to have a lot of bounces, but remember what that spike means. Now, it could also be with a different dimension in a different direction. It could also be a bounce off a wall, which might look like that, which might crest something, right? So you have seagulls and you have crests. Either way, a spike like that means a bounce. Now, you're not going to have a lot of spikes or crests here, but you are going to have what I like to call like a half spike. So sometimes in like the blue direction or something like that, or like his foot lifting off. So or his foot hitting the ground, excuse me. But if you see a Translate Y graph for his foot touching down, right? And you're going to see that in my example in a second. You're going to see a graph that arches down because that's accelerating, right? And remember, it's going from, so this is acceleration, just like what we talked about before. It's flat, and then it gets gradually steeper and steeper, and the steeper and steeper it gets, the faster it gets. And then his foot hits the ground. It can't go below the ground. Now sometimes you'll see an animator cheat like that a little bit, but for the most part, it's going to be nice and flat. It can't go below the ground. The same thing is true for maybe other directions. It might not be downward though. It might look upward and then hit the ground and then be flat. And this could be also like if he runs into a wall and the wall doesn't have any give to it. If you want him to look like he slams into something, that's what that's going to look like. Now conversely, what I like to do is as he's taking off, I like to kind of do the opposite, and it really gives a nice lift effect to his walk. So I have a flat line, and then I do almost the exact opposite, where it comes up like that. And then, obviously, the foot's going to come down at some point, and it looks like that. So a footstep may look like that in the graph editor. I say may. There might be slight differences to yours. The same thing can happen this way. So you could have zero movement and then have them just immediately jump up, and you'll have something that looks like that, where it kind of starts off strong and then tapers off. That's what those graphs mean. Not the half spikes, which are a plant or a hard impact or a lift, but just normal sine curves, right? So if it's a increasing steepness, and that could be either direction. So I know I said in my notes here a positive sign or a negative sign, but what I mean by a plus sign is increasing steepness. So it could be like this, or it could be like this. That's acceleration. Please keep that in mind. And then, like for example, the hips here, you're going to have a negative sine curve or a decreasing sine curve, which is going to be something like this, where it kind of eases in, right? So, or eases out, excuse me. It could also be going this way. When your foot comes up and then is held in the air here, that's easing in. That's where your foot, it will be held off by gravity. So I'm rambling here now, and but just know acceleration, acceleration, deceleration, deceleration. So don't get hung up on the direction. It's really shallow to steep or steep to shallow. All right. Enough talking about the graph editor. Let's look at the graph editor. So we're going to hop into the graph editor. We're going to change our layout for a second. I'm going to remind you how to do that. Keep in mind this. As we adjust a part here, it's going to mess up other parts. You're going to see me mess with the hips first, and those hips are really going to throw the feet off. That's why we do the feet next. So the way we work through our chain or our hierarchy here is we start with the root, and we play with the root, and then we go through our feet, and then we work our way up through the spine and out through the arms. That's because every adjustment we make starting with our root will affect everything else through the parent chains, and that's the parent-child relationship taking effect. So just keep that in mind that as I mess with his hip, it's going to mess with his feet, but don't worry, I'm coming back to look at the feet next. So let's set up our interface. Okay, just to remind you how to set up your interface, you can make custom layouts, and remember, some of you are still looking up here for this information. It's down here in panels. So you go to Panel, Layout, and I like to use the 3-pane split top. And that gives me this layout right here. I like to and I can adjust the size of this as I see fit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this my camera angle, perspective, camera. I make this one my perspective angle so I can reach around and grab what I need to grab and all that stuff. And then this one used to be my dope sheet, and now it's my graph editor. And remember, hit A, resizes your entire graph. So your graph editor looks intimidating. Oh, by the way, some of you are going to hop into your graph editor window first, and then you're going to realize it changes your window down here. That's because Maya won't allow 2 windows with the graph editor. It'll allow 2 windows of any sort of view in your thing, in your scene, but it won't allow you to have 2 dope sheets, or it won't allow you to have 2 graph editors. So if it's not letting you put your graph editor here, make sure you close your actual open graph editor. And you can just use your graph editor from the open window. That's fine too. It's the same effect, but I have a panel setting here where I can just switch it, and it'll be grayed out if I have my window open. All right, so looking at your graph editor like this, remember to hit A to resize it, and then what you'll see is you have all your graphs here. This is rather intimidating, and it looks like a big stringy mess. Some people say it looks like a brainwave function. It gets called all sorts of things. So you want to do this one at a time, one piece at a time. So the first piece we're going to look at is we're going to look at the hips. Or excuse me, I say the hips, and I wrote down the hips. I really mean the root or the cog. And let me just change that right now, so I don't keep saying that. So it's really the root or the cog or the pelvis or whatever you want to call it. So pardon me for calling it hips. But you really want to look at the root here, and you want to look at one dimension at a time. And so I'm going to go through the entire sequence, this entire timeline, and really just kind of overcorrect his waist here. So if I select his waist, his root, his cog, this thing, and I just look at translate Y. Now some of you may look at translate Y and go, oh, it's perfectly flat. Remember that the scale for the graph here is 360 degrees because of the rotations. So before you mess with translate Y, be sure you hit A, and all of a sudden it doesn't look too flat. All right, so let's take a look at this guy right here. This is him falling. So I'm going to go up, and in the back part of my timeline here, and correct him falling. So step number one is I'm going to grab these keyframes here. And now here's lesson number one. Don't be afraid to delete keyframes. So first of all, I've been pressing some buttons. Don't forget F translates to focusing in. A lets you see the entire graph. So you have F, lets you focus in on your selected keyframe. A lets you see everything. I just want to see these four. So I'm going to hit F, and I have this nice sine curve graph here. So I'm going to grab these two, lesson number one, don't be afraid to delete some keyframes. All right, this will make this graph a lot smoother. Now, keep in mind he's falling. When you fall, you're going to accelerate. So we want to make this graph look like that acceleration, and then he's going to hit the ground. So I'm going to break this handle, and remember the brake button is this little white and red little thing that says brake tangent if I stop moving my mouse. I'll click on it, and it turns it into a blue and red thing. This should all be familiar from the ball bounce. I'm going to select that handle, and then click, left click or middle mouse click, and it's not moving. Why not? Because I have to press W or use my move tool over here. So I'm going to hit W, and now all of a sudden I can move my graph so that it looks like he's accelerating. Now, take in mind what I said. It's going to look like I just messed up the feet royally. That's okay. We're going to fix the feet later. So as now he falls, you'll see the feet stretch down, but he hits the ground, and then he stays rather hard. Now, because the hips actually don't make contact with the ground, a nice thing to do here is to give him a little give as he falls in. So to make it look like he's absorbing the impact a little bit. Now, if I zoom in on it, you'll see it a lot better. Right? So I'm going to, he dips in just a little bit, and his knee is going through the ground, but if you notice on my camera view here, you can barely tell. So I'm just going to let that slide. Remember, always animate to your camera. If it's looking good through this camera angle, and this is the camera angle you're going to use for your render, then leave it, right? You'll see he looks a little crooked sometimes here. You'll see these problems. All right, back to translate Y. I can keep going through this, through his hip. So that's one fix right there. The next thing is on this set, he comes up, and he comes back down again. Now, to make it look like he really springs up, I'm going to create another acceleration. So I'm going to delete this keyframe here because it really had no effect on that curve. And then when he comes down to land, I'm also going to delete this keyframe right here. And this one affected it a little bit more, but that's okay. So to make him look like he's springing up, I'm going to take this handle, break it, and give him a bit more acceleration as he stands. And the same thing down here. Break it and give him a bit more of a acceleration as he squats in. So it looks like he really springs up, and then he accelerates down to pick it up, and then he's dipping in to kind of grab the sword. So again, I'm going to pull him down. One other thing to take note, right? His leg looks a little messed up, but from here it looks okay. So I'm just going to keep moving on. And then he gets to this upward motion, and there's a little wobble for it, and that's fine. Now, I could keep going on, and I will, actually, and you're going to see it in high speed. But you go through the entire Y dimension, evaluating and changing your graph to as he springs up, or if you want to make a hard plant, like he does right here. So, like right here, he changes his feet. He goes from this foot to this foot. Now, on my feet are going to be much more dramatic, but I'm focusing on my hips right now. All right, and he springs back up. And he does this lift here. So he pops off the ground. I'm going to give him this acceleration graph right here. I might delete this keyframe. I think I'm going to delete that keyframe. Yep. Just to get him up to this pose more quicker. The pose is a little high, so I'm going to take it and pull it down. Now I can just adjust that graph by shifting it down like that, and now he comes up to this spot rather quickly. Hits the ground. I might break this handle and give it more of a acceleration due to gravity type look to it. Swing, swing. And he does one more pop-up right here that I'm going to break this handle and kind of have him jump up to make it look like he's more athletic. Now, as he does his normal casual walk, I am just going to kind of let it go up and down very, let's say, casually. So that's it for the Y direction. Now that I've done the Y direction, I'm going to go to the translate X and the translate Z. Let me show you something about the translate X. If I hit A, you go, oh, that's a significant difference. But remember, it's a matter of perspective. 0.25 is its highest peak, and negative 0.1. So the biggest difference is like a 3, right? A 0.3, excuse me. So that's 3/10 of one of these units here. This is very insignificant, and these are probably minor adjustments. I'm not even going to bother with my translate X because the movements are so small. Now, if I had lots of time, sure, I'll go through it and be very nitpicky, but I don't have that kind of time. So I'm actually going to skip over translate X. So now I'm going to go to translate Z. And now with translate Z here, he has a lot of movement. So I'm going to focus in again on here and hit F, right? So I made him just move along this one axis. So similarly to translate Y, right? Similarly, he's falling against the gravity. I'm going to have his forward momentum reflect that, but it's going to be kind of an inverse of that direction. So I have translate Y, which is the Y direction getting steeper, and then I have translate Z, which is this forward direction. So I'm going to select these two keyframes, delete them. Okay? Then I'm going to grab this piece right here, and I'm going to break the handle and pull this so that it looks like he's accelerating in the upward way. So this is an upward half spike, and again, boom, he hits the wall. I'm going to give him a little bit of a recoil to make it look like he's kind of absorbing that impact. So he kind of sways forward a bit and then rocks forward and then gets into his position and then stands up. And then again, I'm going to kind of pulse through all these very quickly and kind of just see how it all takes shape. So here he's lunging forward for the thing. I want him to really take off right here, so I'm going to make it steep. And then he stops moving forward right here. This is a significant point because he has to stop. So I'm actually going to leave this keyframe, but delete these two. That's why I'm making that decision to leave that keyframe, because I want him to be exactly there when he grabs the sword. So I'm going to delete these two, break this handle to move it up so he really kind of springs out of his position. And then he's there. I might flatten that out. No, I'm going to leave that as it is. And then again, he springs up. And I want him springing up and springing forward to this spot. So I'm going to take this handle here and break it and make him spring up from here as well. I might even delete this keyframe to make it happen quicker. So now he springs forward, and then it looks like he's keeping his balance a lot better. So it's really just a matter of deciding which handle to break, which keyframes to delete, and what to keep as is. Now here he swaps his feet, and then he starts to lunge forward. So when he lunges forward, I am going to break this handle and push it so he's really springing, he's leaping forward. It'll really make him look like he's lunging forward a lot quicker. And then he comes down, he comes back here. I'm not going to break this handle on this side because this is him easing into the, rocking back into his like ready position. And then he springs forward again. And this is where I want to create that half spike, right? So I'm going to delete this, break that handle, and now push this forward. So it kind of makes him look like he's really jumping. There you go. Now I'm not happy with how high he is there, so I'm actually going to fix that real quick. Just bear with me. And this is also why you do the graph editor like this, is so you can make these kind of adjustments. So I actually want this pose here to be a little lower. So I'm just going to grab these two translate Ys, hold the shift key, and pull them down. So he's kind of bending lower a little bit. And then as he comes to jump up right here, he's a little too high. So I'm going to take this and maybe take this one. Let's take both of them. And I'm going to move them down. And that means I'm going to have to adjust this handle right here to something like that. And maybe I want to move them a little more forward. No, I think it's okay. It's supposed to be a quick little hop. All right. Then from there, he springs back up. Yeah. All right. So translate, going back to translate Z. He's now up here. He's not moving much forward when he's giving his swipes. And then one more time, he springs forward to stand up. And I want to break that handle. Break that handle and pull him up. And I might delete this keyframe. Nope. That one's going to stay. And then as he does his casual walk, I'm not going to have a significant up and down movement. So that is everything with the hips. I could go through the rotates and fix those as well. And if you have that kind of time, it'll add the difference. But because it's rotating, you're going to have a lot more easing in and easing out, and a lot less of the half spikes and the breaking down. It's really the translations that need those half spikes. So the next part is going to be with the feet. And you're going to start with the translations for either the left or the right foot. So once you get your route done with its up and down movements and its forward movements and its rotations, the next thing you want to focus in on is the feet. So with the feet, it's a very similar process. You do want to start with translating Y for the feet, 1 foot at a time first, then worry about the other dimensions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the Ys for both blue and red, and then I'm going to go for the Z's and the rotates and all that other stuff in a second. So the first thing I'm going to do is play with the Y translations for both feet, and then I'll move on to the rest. All right, so here's my red foot. Again, only translate Y, just to regraph it. Here's the fall. I'm going to focus in on that. And this fall, as he's dropping, he hits the ground, or should be hitting the ground, right here. So because I've adjusted the waist, these feet are all off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this handle. I'm going to break this handle to make it look more like a drop. Again, don't forget to hit W, adjust your graph. So notice this kind of lingers on higher. And this foot, I'm actually going to, the left foot, I'm actually going to break at this tangent because I want the right foot to hit first. Now, this foot should move forward quicker too, but I'm not going to deal with that right now. I'm only going to focus on the Y to try and keep things simple. All right. The next spot on this foot is where the foot lifts off. Right now his foot's just kind of lifting off, and I want his foot to kind of push off. So in order to do that, I'm going to break it. Break the handle and pull it off in this half spike in the beginning part of it instead of just the end. So now, when the foot comes off, it looks like he's really shoving that area. Now, he needs a little more translation or rotation, but again, I'm only focused in on translate Y right now. Do one part at a time, or else you're just going to try and do too much at once. So his landing, he should stomp down, and that's going to be another half spike. And then I come back up, and then as he moves along, he has another stomp, which is right here. And get rid of that keyframe. If I break that handle and lift it up, break this handle, lift the blue one up, it'll create this effect as if he's stomping. So it comes up. Now, don't sweat it when you see a problem as you're adjusting. Remember, you're going to go back and fix those. So know that these can be corrected, and you just kind of have to work on a little faith here that you're going to resolve those issues. But right now, give your foot stomps more stompy feel. Now, there's a lot of keyframes in the sequence. I'm going to get rid of a few. This is the quick. He kind of falls back and then accelerates back forward. Now, this one isn't going to be a broken handle in the Z when I get there, but I am going to delete a few of these keyframes to create just a smoother up and down hump. Right here, I'll break this handle to create, this is where he plants his foot, to break his stomp, to make it look like he's stomping or hitting the boom. And again, I'm just worried about this selected handle. I just keep passing through. One more. Broken handle, pull it up, broken handle, pull it down. So, and that's what the foot should look like. So every time his foot lifts up, you should have a bit of a crease. And every time his foot steps down, you should have a bit of a crease. Now I'm going to go through the next pass on his left foot much quicker. And I'm just going to kind of do that in fast forward. It's all the same things right here. And worry about, wait, look, I need to go back and translate this up. There we go. Let's try to do better. And half spike down, half spike. So what's going on here is we're doing the short. Push your energy, I want you to head aside right leg, this side. And break this off. Alright, make this more hardy. There we go. So, both feet in the Y direction, you have broken handles for the liftoff and for the landing, which is a little bit different than what you did for the root or the cog. But now what I'll do is I'll go through both feet again and I'll correct all the other aspects. So the translate Z's, I won't have to do much X. Keep a matter of perspective here, right? The X here at the top is at 0.24 and the negative is at 0.04. There's really only a difference of 0.3 happening on it going left and right, and that's really 1/3 of one of these units. It's not a lot of movement, so I'm going to completely ignore the translate X movement for both of my feet here. What I am going to fix is I'm going to fix the translate Z movement. It moves a lot, going vertical or going up and moving forward. There's a lot, and I'm going to definitely play with some of the rotations as well. So, with my right foot, I'm going to hit A to resize it and start off with that drop here. Okay. So, again, here's him falling, and the Z direction also needs a little more work to kind of correct the spot where it falls. So this is the spot where he touches down, not this spot. So as he's moving forward, you got to really pay attention to what spot do you really want it to hit the ground and know which one to delete. This one's too far forward now with the scheme of things. So I'm going to actually delete that keyframe and see if I want it to be here or here. Now this is the one where he's actually hitting the ground. So I want this one to actually be the broken handle. So I'm going to select this, break the handle, and give it that half spike that I want it to have. So now when he hits the ground, his foot's right there. And as I go through all of the things, I might give him another lift off. Now, the Z angle is a little different because there's no up and down to the translation, so I'm going to have to kind of curve and then recurve it as it moves forward. So here he's lifting off, and there he's planting his foot again. I'm going to keep, normally I would say delete that keyframe, but because I'm breaking this handle and I want to break that handle, I'm going to keep this keyframe here in the middle. So I'm going to go here, break it. Oops, wrong handle. Take this one, break it, and move this guy just a little bit so it has a sharper angle to it. And that's what you really want to keep in mind, is that every time a foot's hitting a ground, you probably want to have a sharp angle rather than a smooth angle, right? You don't want some sort of curve. You want some sort of angular thing. It'll depend on how fast and how much you want to lift off. And then as it readjusts itself here, I'm going to go up to this. I'm going to skip this frame because I like the positioning of that. But then here, that's where he hits the ground again. Actually, here's where he hits the ground. I'm going to break the handle and pull it down so it spikes like so. Nope, that's not what I want. I'll break this handle again. So it looks like, boom, he hits the ground and plants. There you go. My bad. So I wanted that one. So you just got to be very careful as to which one you're hitting. And you just kind of go through the entire rows here. Now, as I'm moving through translations, I'm also going to be checking my rotations. So as this guy is pushing off the ground here, I'm going to want to give him a little rotation on this handle. So I'm going to go to rotate X, hit A so I can see it, focus in here. And I want him to rotate a little bit more forward to really make it look like he's pushing off. So here he's fine. At this keyframe, I want the rotation along the red here to kind of make it look like he's taking off a bit. And you notice it adjusted that angle. And then I'm also going to break that handle. But once I deal with my FK spot, pull that down to make it really look like he's pushing off. All right. So then if I go back to my handle, rotate, and this is where he's pushing off, I'm going to create a little bit of a spike here to really make it look like he shoves off. I'm going to do the same thing for his toe. This is something we haven't talked about, but if I go to his toe, and that's a translate Z for his toe, I believe right here, yep. If I break that handle, pull it up just a bit, now it'll really look like he's pushing off, and then he comes back down to stomp and land. Now, you don't have to do too much with the toe, but I'm just kind of showing you other things you can do. All right. Going back to Z, he goes and he pushes off again right here. And this is going to be interesting to fix. I'm going to focus in on it. So his foot's already lifting off here. His forward momentum isn't going anywhere yet. So this little forward movement right here, he's not pushing off anything. Never mind that he's both feet are off the ground here. I'm going to fix that in a second. But the fact that his foot's not pushing off anything to move forward, I don't need to make that a half spike. Because this foot is moving forward once it's in the air, instead of being pushed off, I'm not making a half spike here. And that's the thing I wanted to get to. So as you look for spots to break handles, remember, if he's moving forward in the air, you don't need to have a broken handle. Now, as he comes down here, he's going to plant his foot hard. So at this spot, I'm going to break the handle, just give a little bit of an angle. So he kind of hits the ground, bam, stomps, and then he's pushing off backwards. So I'm going to break this handle. And then again, this keyframe right here, I'm not going to break the handle because he's in air. He's not going to be pushing off stuff, so he has to decelerate and then re-accelerate it back to this spot. And again, I am going to break this one though, because he's hitting the ground. So many things to look out for. And I believe he has one more step forward right here. Now you're going to go through and you're going to do that with both feet. And you're going to really just kind of double check all your feet placements and make sure you're happy with this one before moving on to the next. All right. So I'm going to keep going in fast forward motion. I'm going to do one more pass on my right foot and see how happy I am with it. One thing to show you here is if you notice on his toe, his left foot, is that I can't twist it. And that happens when we're doing our IKs. You see that, so it's like that, and it stays twisted the whole time. So really the grab is, I can't here, and it's actually found on twist, and it's really those keyframes, go to channel last, and it's just twist it, so it's set at 90 degrees where it wants to be. That's all. Now, the correct is all the other frame frame 90 and key that, and it goes all the way to end and key as well, so it stays key at 90 degrees. Should have actually does. I'm not sure. Right. So then we look again, so we go through this and do everything on the right foot. I'm going to have to go and this will stop here. Is it possible? So I think that's one of the last time. First, get these ones done. Following, going to try to see where is it around here, hit the ground at this one. So we do keyframes, break the handle. So it feels like he's hitting down hard. Bam. Okay. Now go through. Levels up and down. And as the foot forward, it's cancel keyframes. Here, let's not again. So I want to. This is going to push off that. So right here, I'm going to push off my keyframe. Right here, I'm breaking the handle. Start up. So he pushes forward, really pushes forward. He comes up and over. And now this is a lot easier. So this is just stop down. Right here. And what's happening is, when he's using my foot, this is left foot. He's hitting ground a lot quicker. So if I break his handle and then slide him forward, it'll look like he's stepping transferring weight a lot quicker. That's how I so I totally overcorrecting this. It'll look like he's transferring weight. Right here. Now, I might move this up just a bit. There you go. I'll let the higher thing push off. There we go. Alright, so I'll be ready to press stuff like that. Then he stops forward. Focus on that. Right there, just a bit. And his foot lifts off here. This is where we're really paying attention to. Anything happening. So right here. Focus in. We break this handle. And then come up. Delete this side. Okay. And we move these two. And really come out. One handle. Also, he's lifting off just a bit. And then this handle needs to break as well. And break into this spot. So kind of leave this foot. There, so it's extremely behind. Oops, sorry. Something like that. There we go. And last time, push off right here. And I'm going to just break this handle. So what we're going to do next is we're going to play with his spine and his arms on the graph editor, and that will be a lot quicker. The hard part is over once you get your feet and your hips done, and we've already done all the feet and the root, and that's where you get paid, right? Everything else is going to be details, but the main part are the feet and the roots. If you get those down and you get the broken handles with these, the rest is gravy. And the last and final step that we're going to kind of cover, you do things a bit differently than you do the hips and the feet. And there's actually less to do. All we have to focus on now is the rotations for the spine and the arms. And instead of doing them one dimension throughout the entire sequence and kind of correcting it, it's actually better for this part to kind of do them in groupings, right? So if not one keyframe at a time, one groups of keyframes at a time. So what I mean by that is, well, you'll see what I mean. And what we're going to do is keep all this stuff in mind as we go through, right? A spike to a flat if it's impacting, and flat to spikes if it's lifting. And we're going to talk about holds, which means the graph might need to plateau at certain places to kind of create those pauses in his action. You don't want him completely swimmy, as they say. Make it look like he's just in this constant motion. You want him to kind of make it look like he hits and then he moves and then he does that. And then easing in and out, that's when you actually have regular true sine graphs. And then we'll clean up a bit. So all these last 5 steps happen in one final pass. What you do though is you kind of got to look at them all as a group. So what I like to do is just kind of start at the beginning. Again, and I like to use my perspective and where I'm animating. Remember, if it looks good here, this is the camera angle I'm using. I might change it a bit, but if it looks good from this camera angle, I don't need to worry about it. And you might actually look at different angles here, and he'll see him a little bit off balance, or it'll look weird, but it doesn't look weird from this angle, so I keep it. So, as he bends and falls, I just want to make sure that he's swaying nicely. Now, there is a problem here that's going to get fixed later when the section I call the offsetting, where he's kind of hunched down too quickly. I actually want to delay him hunching into this as we move forward. So I'm going to correct that in my next phase. That's in phase 9, which is actually a lot shorter in this phase, in the offsetting phase. So do know that I'm marking that right now. All right, going back though to look at it, I just want to make sure that when he absorbs it, he does hunker in. And what I could do there is I could actually give, instead of, it's going to be rotate Z. And how do I know that? If I hit the rotate tool, it's this blue line here. And what I could actually do here for like the chest here, when he hits the ground, it's hitting it rather flat. Right? So he bends into this, and then nothing happens. It stays static. I could pull this keyframe down a little bit, hold the shift key, pull it down. What that'll do is that'll kind of rock him. And if I do that with every joint, it'll create this kind of absorption, this effect that makes it look like he's absorbing his impact a little bit. So if I do that, let's say here, and kind of rock him so he's not steady, he'll actually kind of rock all these pieces here and make it look like it really kind of he's bouncing along. So that was his waist. I dealt with his gut, or did I? Nope. I'm going to go to his gut here. And so his impact spot is right here. I can actually grab this and pull it down to make it look like he's being jerked around a bit. Now, and the last one will be his neck. His gut, his chest has it. Rotate Z. Yep, it kind of rocks back and forth, correct? Or not. Give it a little bit more. And so what you're doing is you're creating these wonks that kind of create this absorption. And then the last thing with his neck and his head. Rotate Z. So he's hit right here. That's where he hits the ground. So I'm going to take this spot and I'm going to pull it so that his head still rocks forward. And one more with the head. Rotate Z. And I can do the same thing for the, there it is. That's the spot I'm looking for. Instead of having it flat, I want to grab this handle, and I'm not breaking the tangent, I'm just grabbing that handle here and creating a less stable line, which will cause him to kind of really look like he's over-rotating. Now the timing of it's not perfect, and I'm actually going to go back in what's called the offsets and kind of fix that. But I'm kind of unstabilizing his back a little to make it look like he's swaying. I could continue with the hat here, but I'm not going to. The hat, I'm like, so he pops up and the hat bounces up, swings down. And again, as he goes here to grab, I don't need to do much. The way he's grabbing, in fact, I don't need to do anything. His spine, everything works there, and then he pops up. Now, here I can also kind of wonk some of his spine to kind of make it look like he's stabilizing it. So again, this time it's going to be the rotate Y. I just find this spot, focus in on it, and give him a little dip so he's not as stable. So now he kind of bends in a little bit. Again, that looks like he's collapsing in on himself, but on this window, on my perspective view, it's barely noticeable. And that's why it's okay. And notice how he looks a little more fluid just by changing that one. So each little one I twist or I manipulate just a little bit. So it's flat right here. He's not moving a lot here. So once again, I can just grab these handles and kind of give him a little bit more of a yaw to his bend. And it kind of just makes him look that more real. That's what we're going for. So it keeps him from being completely static. I can do the same thing to the neck and keep going. So the questions you have to ask yourself as you're rotating is there a stable spot? Do I want him to be so stiff and stable that it's a completely flat line? And can I actually break that up? I could also hit spline, and that would really cause a lot of dips. So I could switch it from auto, which will recognize when it's flat and keep it flat. I could switch it to a spline here and give him a little bit more of a dip and movement around those places. So now as he moves, his back is not this like static piece. It's definitely moving around and bending. And that's what we're going for. We're trying to make him look less stiff. I'm also going to play with this a little bit on the chest, and again along the rotate Y. So as he bends up, he's arcing this way. And this is with his chest, and then he moves forward. So there's a lot of movement here, and notice this spot is flat, and I want it to be flat because he's definitely poking forward, and so I don't want this one to kind of bend in. So that flat's okay, especially on the spine and stuff, but you definitely want, like his hat here is way too static. So let's look at his hat at this point on the rotation, and as he comes forward, I want the hat still moving, right? So I'm going to take this and kind of move still with it, and then maybe rotate Z. And if it's flat, I'm definitely going to pull that up or down. Oh, wrong handle, sorry. What those will do is they'll just make the movement less static. So it's really a matter of judgment. Every time something's moving or holding, you want to make sure you feel like it's doing what you want to do. Now you can do it with just rekeying as well, but you can do it in the graph editor. So I'm just kind of making it swing, making his little hat tail here kind of swing back and forth just a little bit more than usual, just to kind of give it some extra movement. So now when I swiggle through here, let's see, as he moves through, the hat is definitely swaying a lot more and making it look more like fabric, just by giving it a few extra bobs. Now there's this one part here, it's a little too static again. So I'm just going to find that spot. There it is. That's the flat spots right here. So I'm just going to give him a slight wonk or two so it's not flat. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And what this does is it creates extra movement, and especially if it's like a cloth-like place, you want it to have that extra spot on the graph. I'm going to do the same pass with the arms very quickly. So I'm going to, the same exact concept here. If I want it to be static, it'll be flat. If I definitely want some more movement, now let's just see how that looks. Does it give a little more sway to it? Swings back, and definitely has this little tail whap to it. And this last little piece right here where it comes back into this normal position, I'm going to do the same thing again. So his head, his hat, swings back and forth. I'm going to go to the green one, that's rotate Y. And instead of him just, notice it's flat right here, right? So when he comes to this upright position, maybe I want it to wiggle back and forth a little bit more. So I can take this one, pull it up, this one pull it down, and now I've got a little bit of a hat oscillation happening here before it comes to rest. And I can do that on several different joints. I'm doing this all with the graph editor. I could repose it elsewhere, but it's simple enough just to kind of give it just a little more movement. Swing, swing, and now it's wiggling. It's never stopped. It's always moving. And I'm looking at this hat right here. It's always swinging back and forth just a little bit to get it moving. One more right here just to kind of make it look real. Again, so this is after he swings. It comes back. I'm going to continue it up, continue it back, and continue it back up. Just to kind of give it like a pendulum swing to it. Maybe I did that too much. That's fine. That's it. No comment. There you go. That's the dummy. Get swing. This way. Back down. And these up. Just keep moving. Back to the right. Like that. Alright. And the same thing I'm going to do with the arms is just kind of determine spots that maybe it's too static, give it a little up and down movement on the graph editor. And parts where it's not moving or it's moving too much, make sure I flatten it out. Like right here, this spot right here is rather flat for my arm, and do I want it flat there? No, not really. This spot should be actually have a lot more bend to it. So maybe I want to move one of the, oops, not like that. Maybe I want to move one of these up just to give them a little swing. And this is with the clavicle. So maybe I don't want the shoulder to do it. Maybe I'll have the elbow do it. So his arm definitely swings a little bit more to the left or to the right, so it's less static. So always ask yourself, what's moving when? So now that you've done the spine and arms, you might want to do one last little cleanup and get rid of like unnecessary keyframes or get rid of any other stuff. Another thing that might encourage you is as you're animating, you notice the joints way more than you do what's actually happening. So a good idea is to always kind of go to your camera angle, hit show up here on the top, choose none, show just your polygons or NURBS if you're using them, or if you're Hogan, use NURBS, and kind of double check, and you might be amazed how better it looks without seeing the joints. Right? So while I was paying attention to all the joints and everything, it actually looks pretty good. I wouldn't say perfect, but it's pretty good. Now your last pass, what might clean it up or make things look a little bit better, and everything's just like a small nuance here. Oops. What you might want to do is actually just kind of go through and just kind of see what joints are needed, or what, not joints, what keyframes are needed and what aren't. You don't have to, but I can kind of get through those. See if there's any like little minute hiccups. And this is just fine-tooth combing, right? So I notice there's a little bit of a, no, it's fine. Never mind, don't even do this part. So that's basically the graph editor in a nutshell. Again, you might want to go through and delete maybe a keyframe or two here or there for some things, but you really don't need to do much. Like if this all right here is deleted, it might just make it process a little bit better, but it's not necessary to do. But it just kind of cleans up what you got to look at and makes it just a little less messy. Remember, flats, no movement. So when I go up here, this foot here is staying planted. And that's what you want to go for. So that concludes number 8. That's fixing the graph editor and the splines. We've covered a lot on this one, and it's been broken up into parts for you as well. So go through translate Y with the root, and then go through the one dimension at a time with the root after that. That includes rotations, and then do the same method with the feet. 1 foot at a time, focusing on translate Y, and then 1 foot at a time. Then deal with the other dimensions for the feet, and again, do it 1 foot at a time. Then when you have your root and your feet done, everything else is kind of gravy on the cake, right? So go with the rotations for the spine and the arms, and remember, do them in groupings at a time, or one keyframe along that one line, right? So you have, like, I don't know, pose number 21 or whatever's on keyframe 22. Kind of look to make sure that you're happy with all the movements and how it flows in this one section before moving on. It might also be a good idea to shrink your timeline to kind of just focus in on just certain parts of the graph. Also keep in mind everything that we've done with the Photoshop, but right, the half spikes, that's with a plant or a lift or a hard impact. Full spikes are bounce, and the acceleration and deceleration curves.